Robina, can I ask you about integrity?
Yeah, go on. Explain what you mean.
I always thought that it was a very fixed thing in us. But I'm beginning to realise from what you said this morning that it grows as we grow. That,
Absolutely. Oh my God, yes. But that's interesting that when you say integrity, first of all, what do you mean? And second, what do you mean it's just naturally within us? So why don't you explain what you mean?
Well, I understand that like the self, it has no inherent existence, but it's like a knowing of the right thing to do.
Okay. That's what you mean. Okay, that's really interesting. So, okay, good. So where does it come from? What's its cause? What's the cause of it?
Dharma, I guess.
No, forget that. I mean, in the most simple sense, you had the sense that somehow it's there within us. Many people say that. But what I'm asking is the most simple sense, it's sort of like saying, oh, when I hear music, it just feels natural. It's just within me. Well, why would it be natural to you? Where has your liking for music come from? Speak in ordinary terms. Where would it come from?
Our experience of right and wrong, I guess.
What do you mean? See, in other words, all I'm getting at is we tend to take for granted certain things about ourselves. We say, oh, well, everyone's got a conscience. We just know what's right and we know what's wrong. Well, I mean, that's just a bit superstitious because Buddha's simply saying everything's cause and effect. So, someone comes into this life who wants to kill all the time. We know that's true, but we don't have any way to explain that in our culture because it just seems so horrible because the mother and father are really nice people. So we're very puzzled by that, So the Buddha says it's all just due to cause and effect. You come into this life with a tendency to play music. Guess what? You look on YouTube, some of these genius children playing Bach from the age of 6, and we just don't know how to explain that in our culture. Equally, you will see 6-year-olds torturing people, but we don't like to think about that because we can't understand it. It's all to do with cause and effect. So if you do happen to have integrity in you, honey, it's because you've practiced morality in the past. I mean, it's hardly rocket science, but that doesn't follow that everybody's got it. If everybody had it, we wouldn't be harming each other. There wouldn't be lying and stealing and killing and terrorism and raping. You understand my point?
Yeah,
everything is just we get born with. It's just everything is tendencies. So it's hard to explain it if you're a Christian because we all come from God. So why would there be a psychopath coming from God? It's just confusing to us. And equally with a materialist view, if mummy and daddy don't do that action, we don't know why the person wants to do it. I mean, it's just confusing to us. I mean, all we're doing is talking the different views of the world at the moment. And here we're talking the Buddha's view, which for me at least is a hypothesis, is pretty reasonable. If we're going to posit non-physical consciousness, if we posit that consciousness comes from before, if we posit that everything we have a tendency to do is, guess what, we've done it before, it kind of makes sense in a way, So that's when we can own. So aren't we fortunate that you've got some sense of right and wrong? But the Buddhist approach is we have to learn this to a most intimate, subtle, incredibly sophisticated degree because we're all driven also by delusions and nonsense. And they can win the day very often. And their integrity's gone out the window. So eventually when you've rid the mind of delusions, that's when you've really got integrity. You've got perfect wisdom and perfect integrity. Now you're a bodhisattva and you'll only ever make the right decision. So Buddha's view is we've got this phenomenal potential to grow these parts of ourselves to limitless degrees. Do you understand?
I do. Okay. Yes, thank you.
Good. Okay, great. Thanks, Helen. What else, people?
I have a question here from someone in the Gampa. Can I read it?
Yes, absolutely. Go on.
Seeing my loved ones suffer makes me feel guilty, helpless, and adds on to my anxiety. What practices can I do to lessen my anxiety?
Okay, is that the person whose question it is talking to me?
No.
I need to talk to the person because I have to talk to the person. You've got to tell me what you mean by this. Talk to me, sweetheart.
It adds on to my anxiety when I see my loved ones, especially, seeing suffering.
Yes.
And instead of having compassion...
But you said guilt. You said guilty. So explain the guilty first of all. So therefore, let's say you see your mother suffering and then you feel guilty. So you have to explain that to me. What's the logic of this as far as you can see? Why do you feel that you're somehow to blame? That's what guilt is. Why would you feel that?
Right. So my parents are in India and I'm in New Zealand. at the moment. So it's the distance, and I feel that I'm in a better position, and they're not.
Okay, so you feel that they're in a bad situation, you're in a good situation, so you feel if they're suffering, so then what do you think? Okay, so you feel you should be back, go to India to be with them, or you feel bad because you've got a good time and they've got a bad time? Which is the guilt about?
So the guilt is I'm having a good time.
Okay, so what would, according to you, according to your view, then what would be the solution? What's the solution to this from your point of view?
I am really confused because I know that going there wouldn't solve their problem.
Will or will not? Sorry, it will solve their problem or it won't solve their problem?
It won't solve.
Okay, good. So then, so do you have the view of karma? Do you like the view of karma as an explanation of why things happen?
Yes.
You do. You have confidence in it.
Yes.
So so this is the type of thinking you have to do to yourself, because you see, guilt is a completely useless state of mind. If we analyze guilt, we could spend the next hour describing it, but what guilt is somehow, that's a very common one. Some people, forget it, even if it's their family, that people see other people suffering and then feel guilty that they're not suffering. But if we have the view of karma, so what we have to do with that is not just say, oh yes, I like karma. You have to apply it. So whether it's your family or the next door neighbors who are suffering, then it's due to karma that they're suffering, isn't it? Would you accept that it's due to their own past actions that they are suffering? And if you are having a good time, that's due to your past virtue that you aren't having so much suffering. So the conclusion from that is not guilt. That's useless. It has to be compassion. So in other words, if you're a nurse in a hospital and you're not suffering, then aren't you fortunate, because now you can help the suffering people. So you've got to realize, first of all, it's karma, but you've got to really say those words to yourself. This is a technique to stop you from having the guilt, because guilt is not helpful. Do you accept that it's not helpful? You're frozen or something. Do you accept that guilt is feeling like your response? Guilt is blaming yourself, isn't it? Would you agree with that? But do you accept that it's not helpful? Do you accept that it's not helpful?
That's true.
Do you accept that?
Yes.
So
yes,
the point is, the Buddha's saying, every thought we have, that's why we have to recognize, is it a valid thought? Is it a virtuous thought? Is it a deluded thought? Well, guilt is a deluded thought. There's no benefit in having it. It's not accurate, and you just stay stuck in it. So you have to argue with it to try to move forward. And then you think, well, is there something I can do to help my beloved parents? So I'm asking you, is there something you can do to help your parents? Is there? I'm asking you, is there? Is there something you can do to help them? Everything's frozen.
It's frozen, Venerable. Yeah.
I know. Is there something you can do to help your parents right now from here in New Zealand? Is there something? Is there something?
Yes.
I'm asking you, what can you do to help them?
I've started my practices, my prayers and all of it, which is really helping them. And I'm also doing something like online, some sort of helping in all of it. So yes, but then if there's a sense of
wait a minute, one step at a time, please. We're dealing with the guilt first. Okay, so you feel there is something you can do to help your parents. Besides your prayers, how do you help your parents with their suffering? What do you do?
I talk to them over video calls and audio calls.
And that's useful, and that helps them. So this is what in every one of the questions we've had, there's a certain person and they have a problem. So always you've got to bring it down to earth. If there is something you can do to help your parents, then this is marvelous. And you love them, you take care of them, you look after them, you speak to them. So that's the best thing you can do. This is marvelous. So now you try to deal with your guilt in that way. Guilt is paralyzed. Guilt is actually self-pity. Guilt is just your problem. It's ego. So then you think, what can I do to help them? And you're doing exactly what you can do. And that will help them. You are loving them and being kind to them and talking to them. Fantastic. Now that's the guilt. You have to work with that every day. So the next thing you're feeling, you say you have anxiety. So what is anxiety? how does that feel? What do you think anxiety is? Explain it to me.
I have a feeling of a real helplessness. And it's just kind of a constant thought that, oh my God, I know it's going to be uncertain, but what's going to happen next? And
Right.
then just kind of...
Okay, so then what's Buddha's teaching about this? Have you ever heard that things are impermanent? I mean, I'm being very practical because this is the only way to be. And sweetheart, you are describing everything everybody feels. We all feel anxiety. We all worry about change. We all have guilt. But this is what the Buddha's techniques are about, if you want to practice them, not just to do your prayers, but to work on your mind very carefully every day. It's natural that you feel this way, but you've always got to try and find a solution. So worrying about what will happen, I mean, everything is impermanent. Everything changes. The fact is, I mean, what is the suffering they're having? Are they sick or what's going on? What's the suffering they're having?
It was a medical situation.
Okay, good, all right. So have you ever heard that people die? Have you heard of death? You think you know your parents will die one day. Is that true? You know you will die one day. Is that true? Well, then start getting realistic, girl. I mean, it's not that easy, but what I'm saying is down to earth and practical. And this is how you use Buddha's teachings. You don't just read them in the book and say, oh, I like Buddha's views about impermanence. I like Buddha's view about karma. You have to apply it to your mind, sweetheart, and do your best. So of course you're anxious because you love your parents. And of course you feel guilty. All of these things are natural, but you have to look at it, own it, understand it, hear the story it's saying, and then you argue with it. Because the fact is, the more you have guilt and the more you have anxiety, the more hopeless you become, and you can do nothing to help. So it's actually to be helpful to your parents, you need to not have guilt, not have anxiety. You have to understand impermanence, realize this is the reality. Of course you worry. I mean, but I remember one time one woman on one of the teachings, and she said, I worry all day that something will happen to my husband. I never stop thinking about it. And she said, well, can you please tell me a method of how to accept accept day to day? I said, don't worry about day to day. Just accept the fact that he will die one day. Honey, your parents will die one day, and they might even suffer terribly before they die. This is reality. So the more you keep yourself steady, the more you understand impermanence, the more you understand not having guilt, then you can do what you can to help. But it doesn't mean you can make it go away. That's my point to every person. If you can help that lady in the bed, if you can help your crazy brother, but sometimes we can't help. It's just the way things are. You don't become flippant. You have enormous compassion and you do everything you can. But, and that's the reality. We've got to be like this. It's not easy, but it's possible. Then you can be helpful. And even if your mother is in bed dying with cancer, guaranteed to die in 1 week, you can still be loving, you can still be kind, and you can help her die peacefully. There's so much you can do instead of, if only she didn't die. I wish she didn't die. Oh my God, imagine if she does die. She will die. So you be ready to help her when she's alive. You be ready to help her when she's depressed. You be ready to help her when she's dying. This is how we help people. This is compassion. So you keep doing your best, sweetheart. Are you communicating with me?
Yes.
Did you hear me, darling? So just keep practicing, keep understanding impermanence, keep understanding reality, keep working on your mind, and do everything you can to love your mummy and daddy, to love them and to help them and support them. This is all you can do. Do you understand, darling? Good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. What else, people? Hello, Paul Kelly. Paul Kelly and I have known each other since 1978. He's a POM. He's a POM. And now he's in New Zealand, in Nelson. You still in Nelson, Paul? You in Nelson still?
I'm still in Nelson.
Okay, good. You see, he's a POM. You can't help it. Look at him, a Cockney. He's a complete Cockney. So that's 1978.
That's right, love.
It's, isn't it? I know. Well, my father was a Cockney as well, so we're friends. Yeah. 78, 88, 98, 118. Yeah, 40. We've known each other for 42 years. And we're both still alive. It's pretty amazing. I know, darling. You doing well?
I'm doing well.
I'm very happy.
Always enjoy listening to you.
Oh, good, darling. Okay. Okay, people, what other questions? Any more questions you have? Any old thing? Come on, ask me. Yes, Felicity, you asked me a question.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello, Felicity.
First of all, thank you very much. So much of what you've said has been really relevant.
Good.
And needs applying.
That's exactly right, darling. We've got to remember that part. In other words, the thing is, what's the action? You hear the problem and you go, what's the action? And we try to find an action. Got to keep being brave like that, you know. Go on, talk to me.
So I think my question is, I suppose, I'm not the only person like this.
Yeah.
But the context is that I'm full-time caregiver, 24-hour day for my mother, but my sister gives me 2 days a week respite.
Wonderful.
She is a person who's quite volatile.
I understand.
And has a tendency to lash out.
I understand.
We come from quite a distressed family. There was a lot of violence, and I have a PTSD diagnosis. What that means is that the Dharma vanishes. My mind, my sort of cognitive mind of what's happening here, what can I do? I'm so quick to go into a state of fear because her anger, her aggression
that's right.
triggers me.
I understand.
So around the Dharma, there's lots and lots of teachings about, there's so much good advice and stuff like that, but it just keeps vanishing at the crucial moment. And I don't know does Buddhism have a kind of a way to hold that more, or what can me, in common with everybody who has that vulnerability, do about our fear?
I understand, Felicity. Okay, so you're giving a Western diagnosis, PTSD, post-traumatic stress, but let's give a Buddhist diagnosis, which we've been talking about the whole time. But of course, it doesn't sound very comfortable to us because, your diagnosis is, so you're not in the family, you're not one of the people who shouts and yells, is that right?
I've been known to shout back under duress, but mostly
good.
I get paralyzed.
This is good. This is extremely helpful. You're one of the good girls. Would you? I'm not being rude now.
Girl.
So you do, so this is exactly like I talked about one of my sisters before. So if we've all got attachment, and remember, attachment is a junkie in us that only wants the nice things. So basically, attachment, one of its functions is it can't stand problems. Now, can you hear that? You can't stand drama. You can't stand arguments. So my response to it in my family was to shout and yell. That was my response. And that's the way anger responds. So attachment, we've all got attachment, Felicity. This is the Buddhist analysis of every human being, every being in the universe. We've all got attachment. And the raw fundamental energy of attachment, it's multifaceted, is it only can cope with nice things. Can you hear that point? It can only cope with nice things. So when it doesn't get what it wants, and that's exactly what happens when your attachment, and we've all got it, sweetheart. You see, alongside your attachment, you've got love, kindness, generosity, compassion. They're our good things. They're our saving grace. So we see that in you, and we see that in other people. But we don't have this deeper analysis like Buddha does about these other parts of our mind that we just consider normal. So, so your response to when your attachment doesn't get what it wants is you freeze, you panic, and you go in. And that's how, so aversion, there's attachment and there's aversion. Attachment is the junkie that drives us to only get the nice things. And the millisecond our attachment doesn't get what it wants, aversion is the bare bones name of the state of mind that is the response. But it's multifaceted. The volatile expression of aversion, which is your sister and me, is you shout and yell. But there are milder versions of aversion, and yours is one of those. It's like frustrated, fear, panic, anxiety, and it even becomes depression. And because PTSD is the denial all your life of all the dramas, so now whenever they comes, it just triggers all this panic and fear, and you lose the plot. So like all of us, we've got to see, we've all got attachment, and when it doesn't get what it wants, and in your case when your sister shouts and yells, but you got to then recognize what's arising is aversion. Aversion is, go away. So mine is go away, but I punch as well. I don't now, but I shout and yell. So mine is evident. You can see mine easily. You can see your sister's easily. But people like you, usually people like me and your sister, we're the naughty ones, we're the ones that make the trouble, and you poor guys suffocated, and it all becomes this internalized aversion that ends up becoming depression and then all panic attacks, you know. But it's the same principle, darling. We've all got attachment. So when your sister's attachment doesn't get what it wants, she shouts and yells. When your attachment doesn't get what it wants, which is when your sister shouts and yells, yours becomes internalized, and you want to go away, you push it away, you're paralyzed, you can't make it, you've got no common sense. So we've all got the same problem. It manifests in different ways. You understand? So of course, that's the whole point of being a Buddhist, by learning to see these parts of our mind. So like all of us, my practice has to be to control my mouth. At least to start controlling my mouth, and then learn to work with that aversion in my mind. And you do the analysis, you know, and realize, you know, and because anger is like this panic attack. Anger really is a panic attack. Look at your sister. If you didn't know she was being angry, you just look at your sister. She's having a panic attack, basically. But your panic attack goes in. Hers goes out. So in the end, we're all the same, but we're different packages. So all of us have to practice. So what patience means, and it sounds peculiar, what patience is this very brave attitude, a courageous attitude that greets the problem. So you've got to practice, maybe from a distance, of observing your sister very objectively and analysing and observing what is it about that causes me so much terror, causes you to have aversion, but yours is more silent. So we've all got attachment and we've all got aversion. So as we give up attachment, which means we learn to recognize that everything nice won't happen. It's just not going to be the way life is. So we get braver in facing the bad thing. So eventually, so from someone like me, when I see another person shouting, it doesn't worry me because I understand it. Do you understand that? It doesn't worry me. So my practice is not to respond to it. So everybody has to be that way, but yours is more hard to see because it's become internalized. Are we communicating, Felicity?
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I've, you know, I'm really confused because obviously I have that defense of just like cutting off from her, and I have a lot of communication strategies to protect and de-escalate the
That's
contact.
Right, exactly. That's right.
Fundamentally, I know that the secret is supposed to be open-hearted, but the moment I imagine being open-hearted to her energy.
Of course, it's difficult. So that's why that's why you see, this is the wisdom wing and the compassion wing again. If you can't handle being around her, which is clear you can't, but in a sense you don't have a choice, do you? Because you've got to be around.
No, I don't, and I want to be able to handle.
So this is where you just have to keep working. You've got to keep working on yourself, sweetheart. Understanding the attachment in you, which is this craving for everything to be lovely. We've all got it, Felicity, but your response to it is more a fear one, whereas mine's a shouting one. In the end, they're both fear, but mine's are more volatile. But and again, the other thing is people like you give a lot. I know for me, when I'd get angry, and I could see that people be afraid of me, and that was so distressing to me because I thought, well, I'm just only shouting, it's no big deal. But we can see how anger is so scary. But you've got to learn not to be scared of her. You've got to learn to love her. You've got to learn to see her, the other parts of her, see the good, talk to the better parts of her, try not to be afraid of her, try to show that you love her, and that will be a powerful thing for her. It's a very brave thing for you to do, but don't paint the whole of her with the anger brush. She's got other qualities as well. She suffers more from her anger than you do, but you've got to see that. And of course it's not easy, darling, it's not easy. She shouldn't be angry, she should try and change, but you can't tell her that. So you've got to just talk to the better part of her and learn to see it like a 2-year-old having a tantrum. You don't buy into it. You don't deny it. You don't push it away. You don't try to be afraid of it. That's your practice, to learn to become fearless. And then the more you can become fearless, the less power her anger will have over you. And you'll stop all these strategies of trying to protect. You don't need to. Just learn to continue to work on your mind and talk to the better part of her and just sort of give it less power. That's all you can do. And it'll be good for her. It'll be good for her.
Yeah.
But you do your best, sweetheart. And, do your best. All we can do is do your best,
Yeah. I think that's very useful, this talking to the better part.
That's exactly, that's the point. I swear to you that is so powerful to do that. Most of us don't. Most of us buy into what the person gives to us. But if you can, and you do love your sister, do you?
Well, it's questionable.
Okay, so you don't.
We've always been estranged.
Estranged?
Yeah, we've always been very estranged, and I think I love her in the sense that I kind of feel like I love her because she's my sister.
Okay.
I love her, but I know that's based on the
I know.
expectation that she will be a nice, supportive sister.
I understand that, yeah.
I can see the attachment in there. I understand
That's
that.
right.
And I think that the lack of actively loving her is just the self-defense has gone.
No, I understand
like
that. I understand that. Does she try to reach out to you, or does she feel you don't like her, or does she doesn't like you?
She feels rejected. I mean, I understand the
darling?
situation.
No, what did you say? What did you say about her?
She feels rejected, but she also has a lot of aversion.
No, of course. She feels rejected by you, which is sort of true. You have rejected her.
Yeah.
But that's her pride, that's her resentment, that's her attachment not getting what it wants. And that's the point when we can know our own mind in this way, then you can understand her. And you just try and do your best and and try and just thank her for her kindness and be kind, try and say kind words to her. How kind you are for taking care of Mum. Thank you so much. Just say little kind things every now and then. And just remember, she's just like you. She wants to be happy. She doesn't want to suffer. She's the one who suffers from her anger, believe me, And because if she doesn't know how to change it, that's her problem. But it's like, and it's so hard to get, because she's got all these projections about you. You've got all those projections about her, and we can't get past those projections sometimes. So you try and be brave. Try not to be so afraid of her. Try to not buy into her anger. Try to see the better part. Just try to do that. And try and be just kind to her and thank her. And, those kind of things. Things that she wants. Yeah. That'll be very powerful. A little bit at a time, and it's your practice. This is all your practice, darling.
Yeah. I know that it is. I know the whole thing is really supposed to heal me and
That's
her,
right.
I hope.
That's right, exactly.
That thing about, I'm priming myself with kindness toward her when I'm not around her is going to be a big part of it, isn't it?
Of course it is, exactly. And that means try and just remember some of her good qualities. Yeah. When we have an enormous attachment for one person, all we see is their good qualities and we don't see their bad. When we have aversion for somebody, then all we see is their bad. So in your own mind, as a practice, try and recall some of her good qualities. And then you point those out to her and you just say, thank you so much. Thank you for helping me. I'm so grateful. How kind you are taking care of Mum, or whatever there's little things that are outside your normal way of responding. And try not to have fear. Try to go against the fear. Try to be brave and face what it is when you see it. Or, half the time it's you anticipating it and you're afraid of it happening, isn't it?
Oh, yes and no. It comes from nowhere sometimes as well.
20 times a day, once a month. I mean, let's be literal now. 20 times a day, once a month.
Probably every phone call will include some little lashing out.
So it's phone calls. You have phone calls about your mum, you mean?
Mostly texts, or now the strategy is I just do WhatsApp talks and hopefully she'll talk
darling?
back.
You do what? You do what?
I use WhatsApp a lot to communicate with her because I don't.
Well, that's easier. But would you see her when she comes to see your mum? Do you see her on those days?
No, I don't. No.
Ever?
We pass. I've told her that if I've had a break, when I come back into the house, I need to keep my equilibrium because I have to live off those 2 days for the next 2 weeks. So
sorry, stop right there. What do you mean live off those 2 days?
Oh, sorry.
What do you mean?
It's getting complicated. Basically, I relieve her when she leaves, but we just drive in and out of the driveway.
What do you mean you live off those 2 days for the next 2 weeks? That sounds quite heavy.
In the 2 weeks, it's very demanding. My mother's got high needs, so in those 2 weeks I rest and I try to preserve.
It sounds to me like you've got aversion, but it sounds to me like you've got aversion to your mum as well. That's why.
I love my mother.
That's why you get so exhausted.
I'm totally on to doing it, but I have to look after myself in that respite and maintain the equilibrium of my respite to do the job of looking after Mum. And I don't allow.
So why does it make you exhausted to look after your mum?
Sorry?
Why does it make you exhausted to look after your mum?
Because it starts at 6 a.m. and ends at 11:30, and she can't walk and she can't eat, and another family would probably put her in a home by now, but
there's no other solution. You can't share the job with other people. There's no other solution for you.
I have support. I have the best that's possible, but it is long. It is physically demanding and mentally demanding. And actually, it's the best thing I've ever done. It has cured me of so much selfishness and so much. It's shown me all sorts of bits about myself I didn't know that I had.
Of course,
but I have
it's amazing practice. Amazing practice,
yeah. And I keep focusing. I'm a bit like my advice. Like I'm forgetting about my good bits and focusing on my aversion and problem, aren't I?
No, you have to remember. So is your sister kind to your mother?
Yeah, I think so. She can be a bit blind because she's
But she's kind to your mum, and that's good. So it's important, though. You just say nice things to her every now and again. You take the initiative to say nice things. Like when you see her, thank you so much. You're so kind. You know, just something simple, something little thing to break these old ancient habits between you. You know?
Thank you. Yeah, because it is just a habit too for all of us, as much as it feels like an nervous system thing.
And you take each other for granted because you're sisters. You really do extra make an effort to be kind, to say kind words, you know, to your sister. You really must try that, darling. Do you understand? Slowly.
Yeah.
And yes, take care of yourself. You need to take care of yourself for sure. But keep rejoicing in what you're doing. It's such an amazing thing to repay the kindness of your mum. You know, it's incredible. So much compassion. You must never forget that and tell yourself that and rejoice. Okay?
Yeah.
Good, Felicity.
And not allow what I often describe it as like there's all this light, you know, and there's this shadow. But I keep clinging to the shadow. I'm letting the shampoo being the vampire on all the light, really, aren't I? And so this is my point where I have to work.
That's right.
And the route for me to work with it is exactly what the Buddha says. You just apply the opposite. I have to be kind and loving to my sister.
Darling. Exactly. Slowly. It's all right. And to yourself. Remember, and you must rejoice continuously in your good work. Try not to feel burdened by it, even though it is hard work. Have a good sleep. Really have a good massage every now and again. Have a good sleep. Go and do something really relaxing. And relax and really enjoy. It's like, you know, you're doing a retreat. So you work really hard, then you really relax. It's perfect. Keep moving, Felicity. Thank you, darling.
Thank you very much.
See you, sweetheart. Thank you very much. All these, every single story people are saying, we all recognize. Every single one of us recognizes all of this. This is the interface of. This is how we put a compassion into practice. I have all these nice theories, you know. This is how we put it into practice. And it's really, we've got to know your own mind well first. This is the crucial piece, you know. So the last two verses, and the last two verses of these 8 verses. The next one is where tonglen comes from. You know, this amazing practice, which is the culmination of all these techniques, starting with equanimity, going to the mother, all being our mum, then mother is kind, then I'm going to repay the kindness, and these series of techniques where you do this gradual work of exchanging self for others. All these techniques, I didn't go into them. The next one would be that you first decide that everybody's equal to you. You use logic to break down ego's assumption that I'm more important. Most of us don't think we're more important. We don't think we're more important, but it's the very nature of having attachment. Of course, what is the main word in our mind? It's called I. You know, everything's in reference to I. Well, of course, we think it's normal, and it is, but the point is we're trying to smash that. So this brings us to another really crucial point. You all know, if you read the Buddhist literature, that you know that you're going to read about in the bodhisattva path, you read about self-cherishing. So it's really interesting because what that is just the Tibetan's term for what we call selfishness, putting self first. And it's really kind of distressing to hear about this because if somebody accuses us of being selfish, that's really distressing. We really don't like to think that. It's really awful because we all feel so exhausted. I mean, listen to Felicity's story. We feel drained, we feel exhausted, we feel anxious. You know, listen to everybody's point. We all feel that, and that's because we've got these delusions. We learn on the wisdom wing about attachment and aversion, these fundamental states of mind that drive everything we experience, you know. So we can say that on the wisdom wing, the main enemy is called attachment. And it's this term that refers to this junky inness based upon the deepest delusion of ego grasping, which we want to talk about because that's discussed in the 8th of the 8 verses. And that's where we're going to talk about emptiness. That's when we really develop the wisdom wing. So, you know, because of ego grasping, the root delusion, we then have attachment to get what that fantasy I wants, which is this panic-stricken craving every second. And then as we've been discussing, the millisecond it doesn't get what it wants, that turns into aversion. It's either anger, annoyance, upset, frustrated, anxiety, worry, despair, and depression. There's a whole spectrum of the response of aversion, depending on your personality. And we run between these two 1,000 times a day. They are primordially deep, you know? So the main enemy in the wisdom wing is called attachment. And as Lama Zopa says, when you've got renunciation, which is the culmination for us on the Mahayana path of junior school and high school, of the wisdom wing, of the lowest and middle scope, renunciation is the first major realization we get. And as Lama Zopa says, we've got renunciation when just the thought of another moment of attachment is so repulsive, it's like being in a septic tank. Now, we can see how high that is. You don't really get rid of attachment until you realize emptiness. It's so primordial, but we've just got to hear it. So attachment's the problem. And according to the Four Noble Truths, effectively, this is the main source of all sentient being suffering since beginningless time, based on the ego grasping. Now, in the compassion wing, we hear that the main enemy is self-cherishing or selfishness. So all that is because the emphasis in the first scope and second scope of practice, the wisdom wing, is to see the delusions, which is what limits me and which is what causes me suffering, and I'm trying to get rid of them to stop suffering. But here on the compassion wing, now our main emphasis is to break down the barriers that ego grasping and attachment have created that make up the concept of me and other. We're trying to break down that artificial barrier. So there, in that respect, what the main enemy, which is a consequence of attachment, is to put me first. Because here we're trying to make that paradigm shift on the bodhisattva path, and when we finally get bodhicitta, when we finally have literally exchanged self for others. Now finally with bodhicitta, we have now others are more important than me. So it's the whole emphasis on the bodhisattva path, you know. It was so funny. I remember one course at Mahamudra Centre in the States. The course was on how dealing with self-cherishing. And this is, of course, it sounds a very sweet word, doesn't it? Cherishing is a nice word. So self-cherishing sounds very nice for us in the West. And so it's referring to selfishness. So anyway, this woman came to this course for the first time. She said, "Oh, I'm so happy to learn to know how to cherish myself." And then she discovered it's all about selfishness. She got a bit of a shock, you know, because it's such a sweet word, cherishing, isn't it? Anyway, it's really kind of powerful, and it's intense because it seems so opposite to normal. To think you've got to cherish others more than yourself. I mean, listen to how Felicity was talking. Just by taking care of your mummy from 6 a.m. till 11 at night, of course it's exhausting. But when you see, this is the point too, Felicity, when we realize, and this is very shocking, in our world we'd say, oh, that's normal. But excuse me, if we were bodhisattvas, Felicity, and if we'd realized emptiness, honey, you'd never get exhausted. You would never be exhausted. This is insane to think it's possible, isn't it? So the reason we get exhausted is because we have attachment, and then aversion arises, despair arises, anxiety arises, exhaustion arises. So we need to sleep. We have to know where we're at. It's perfectly fine, honey. But when we know how to label these different things and know what we're capable of eventually. So that's why the bodhisattva path is so outrageous. To imagine that you actually have to love, that we have the potential to love and have compassion for every single tiny sentient being, and to be like these bodhisattvas like Lama Zopa, for whom sleep is a disgusting waste of time. I mean, it's just inconceivable to us, you know. But we shouldn't feel bad about it. We shouldn't feel guilty. Just know that's where we're heading and know it's possible. If he can do it, honey, I can do it. So we aim for it. That's why we have to know our capability. It's just like if you go to the gym, you can't suddenly pick up 400 kilos of weights because you're just not capable. You've got to know what you're capable of. This is what I'm stressing continuously. You've got to know where you are at and what you're capable of. You've got to know the weights you're able to carry in the future and you move towards it. It's a progressive, incremental thing, you know. Compassion is not just set in stone. Integrity is just not set in stone. We can grow these limitlessly, and that's the point. In other words, what Buddhism is really saying is we can grow ourselves into this amazing person. So it's a gradual, incremental development according to our capacity. So the 7th verse is where it talks about how, you know, from now on, I am going to give all my happiness to others. And then it says, and secretly take upon myself all their suffering. So this, I think, is the evolution of this practice that for some reason in the West, people love this practice, but it's so advanced. I'm always amazed that people like it. It's called in Tibetan, tonglen, giving, taking. So it's a way of formalizing this attitude in verse 7. So what it is, you can do it in a formal meditation. You sit down and you imagine Just say your mummy's suffering. You imagine your sister suffering. That'd be more brave for you for listening. You imagine the person you don't like, they're suffering. Or you imagine your beloved. You start with your beloved, it's the best. You start with your beloved child or your beloved mummy who you do adore. And you visualize them in front of you. So you're using your breath. And so this is the attitude which you do formally in the meditation. So you'd visualize their suffering. So you do the taking first, tonglen, giving, taking. So what you do is you simply breathe. You imagine breathing off the person. You breathe into yourself their suffering. So, and then when you breathe in, you can maybe have a little rock at your heart, which is like your self-cherishing. And as you breathe in their suffering like yucky smoke, you visualize it kind of cracks away at your selfishness. And then when you breathe out all this radiant light, and you imagine giving to this person your happiness, your merit, your good health. So it's an outrageous attitude. Think about it. So it's this tonglen, like compassion is, oh my God, look at that suffering. That's already incredible. The next level is, what can I do to take it away? That's called great compassion. Like I said, the unique characteristic of the compassion of the bodhisattva path. And it's an actual technical term, mahakaruna, great compassion, this personal sense of responsibility. What can I do to alleviate that suffering? What can I do? And they must have that. That's why we're talking here in the Mahamudra Centre person. I didn't get her name. Just sits there and feels guilty about her parents. That's not helpful. It's understandable. But the next question is, what can I do to help? This is so proactive. And as soon as you can think, what can I do to help? You feel better. You feel more courageous. Just sitting there paralyzed, feeling bad because I'm not suffering. It is worse than useless. So compassion is, look at that suffering. It's unbearable. Then you go to the next level. What can I do? Now, sometimes, this is the point, you can't do anything. You don't get guilty then. You continue to work on yourself, thinking, may I be able to help sentient beings? So in order to do that, I must continue practicing. You've got no choice. You have long-term goal. But if you can do something, phone your mother, be kind, say thank you to your sister. You do the smallest thing you can do, which gives you courage. But the next level of compassion, so not only, oh my God, look at that suffering. Not only what can I do to take it away, but you know what? The third one is like bonus on the top. It's like the icing on the top. This is tonglen. You know what? I would rather have the suffering than you. This is profound. I often hear parents talk this way, It's very amazing. I would rather have the suffering than my child. We hear it. It's an incredibly brave attitude. Now, the point is this, though, don't misunderstand this practice. So when you're breathing in, imagining taking upon yourself your beloved's headache, let's just say they've got a headache, and the aim is, tonglen is not a method for you to actually get a headache. That's absurd. It's an attitude that you're trying to cultivate, this brave attitude that you're thinking to yourself, if I could take upon myself that headache, I would rather have it than them. This is the most supreme compassion, the most courageous compassion. So when you do the technique, you're not trying to get a headache. You're imagining them being free of the headache. And it makes you happy to know that they're free of the headache. And then as a practice to smash your own self-cherishing, you imagine it smashing your self-cherishing, having the courage to think, I would rather have it. It's an attitude. And so it increases your compassion. That's the point of it. The aim isn't to take upon yourself their headache. The other one is that tonglen is not a healing technique. That's not the point of this. There are many healing techniques. You pray to the medicine Buddha. You blow medicine Buddha mantra. You give them an aspirin. This is not a healing technique. It's a powerful practice for you to train in this brave attitude that if I could, I would. So what will be the result of that? One day you will be able to jump in front of the car because you've trained yourself and you've got such compassion. It will become effortless. So it's not a healing technique. It is not to get a headache. It's not like that. It's you training to become bravely compassionate. in whatever way you can, you know. Because, I mean, in other words, it's atomic bomb on selfishness. It's an atomic bomb on self-cherishing. It's an atomic bomb on me. That's the point of all these practices, you know. It's a profound practice. People do years and years of retreat on this, taking every single being in every single realm of existence. So I always tell this story as an example of a person who's meditated for years and years, and who looks like from this story I'm about to tell you, that indeed they have accomplished this amazing ability to take upon themselves the suffering of another. So there's this friend of ours called Harry. Some of you might know him, an American fellow, used to be a monk, and he's a meditator. He's got a cave up in Lama Zopa's area, up in the Mount Everest Centre, in the Mount Everest mountains, up in the Mount Everest area, where Lama Zopa comes from. He's got a cave up there. He's spent years and years, since the 80s probably, being a meditator, a serious meditator. So when anybody ever knows Harry, says, oh, Harry's a bodhisattva, Harry's a bodhisattva. And I think, well, yeah, he might be. I don't know. He's a nice fellow. Everyone loves Harry. He's always beaming and happy and smiling. He's always there helping people, looks very humble and unassuming. But when I heard this story, it seemed to me perhaps he is, you know. So the story goes like this. He was at Copan. This must be before cell phones, okay, before mobiles. Yeah, probably early 90s. And he's at Copan Monastery in Kathmandu, and he's preparing to go up to his mountain cave again to meditate, which is, you know, you get a helicopter or you get a plane, then you have to walk like 10 days or 2 weeks or whatever, way up there, you know, whatever it is, 4 days, 5 days, I can't remember. So anyway, he said this particular route, he told me this story. This particular route was, anyway, never mind, that's the first. So he's at Copan. And then Lama Zopa, he heard that Harry was going up to the mountain, to his cave. And then Lama Zopa said he had a dream that Harry would die. Well, first of all, Lama Zopa never sleeps. So Lama Zopa is just being humble. So it's his clairvoyance, but he's just being humble, saying he had a dream. So he said, get a message to Harry to tell him not to go. He said he would die, but he couldn't. Harry had left, and it was obviously before cell phones, so nobody could ring him up. So he's gone. So then Lama Zopa asked Geshe Lama Kontrog, this amazing Lama I mentioned, lived up in the cave, naked, no sleep, no food, blah, 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 like I mentioned before, I think. It's an amazing yogi. He asked him, he was at Copan at the time, because after Lama Yeshe passed away, Geshe Lama Kontrog had been in these mountains for years and years meditating. Suddenly he turned up at Copan, and he stayed there the last 20 years of his life, and he turned up soon after Lama Yeshe passed away. So I remember Lama Zopa said that when Lama Yeshe passed away, all the smiles at Copan went away. But when Geshe Lama Kontrog came, all the smiles came back, because people adored him there. And he passed away in 2001 at Copan. Anyway, being a great yogi, Lama Zopa, and they were close friends, asked him to please pray for Harry. So that's what happened at Copan. So then I heard this story. Harry told me the story, and it must have first, I asked him about it because I'd heard it, because he'd gone up there with one nun. She must have first told the story. So anyway, apparently, the main trek was had been an avalanche or something, so they had to take a separate one around a certain area where it was incredibly dangerous. And those treks up there are really incredible. The last 4 years we've been leading treks up to Lama Zopa's cave to raise money for Rinpoche's plans up there. He's got amazing plans to build a Guru Rinpoche Pure Land, a replica of Guru Rinpoche's Pure Land. It's a very traditional thing among the Tibetans. So he wants to build that. So we've been raising money for him. And we go up there in these treks. And I remember it's so treacherous walking up on those roads, you know. Unbelievable. You can fall. I nearly fell over. Yak nearly knocked me over. You know, someone saved me. But anyway, this particular one where it's really rough, and where these Sherpas, we had 35 people every year. We have 35 people. People love this. We've got our next one booked. We're doing a virtual one on Monday, the 9th. On the 9th, yeah, on the 9th. From San Francisco. Maybe the timing is wrong for you guys. Me and Christina, who lead it, we're going to do one showing all the pictures and talk about this trek and going up to the mountains of Rinpoche's place. It's a wonderful place up there, if you like the mountains. I'd never walked up a mountain in my entire life, I promise. Not even a hill. I'd rather walk flat in a city like Auckland or Sydney or London or something. So I thought I'd go, because Christina asked me. I said, oh, sure, I'll go, you know. I'd never walked up a mountain in my life, and I was so anxious about it, trying to buy the right shoes. I was just so worried. I couldn't believe it, you know. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole life. I thought I'd die. It's 14,000 meters or something. No, not meters. 7,000 meters. I forget what it is. But it's incredible. You walk for 4 or 5 days and it's so unbelievable. I mean, I've never done anything so stressful in my life. Some people adore these mountains. They love walking up the mountains. And when I told Lama Zopa at Kopan we were going, he was so happy. And he said, you won't want to come back, Robina. Well, I promise you, I did want to come back. I couldn't wait to get back. But anyway, I've been 3 years. I go every time. And the last 2, I take a helicopter. I mean, the walk was so intense, I thought I'd die, I swear to you. Anyway, it was very nice. And the mountains are wonderful. So anyway, there's Harry walking up this hill with his pack on his back, right? And he sees 3, and these Sherpas, right? We had like 12 Sherpas, and they carry 60 kilos on their backs with their flip-flops on their feet. And all the Westerners wear these fancy shoes with big necks on them and cost $500. But they wear their flip-flops, you know. They're unbelievable. These skinny little Sherpa boys. And of course, it's an honor for them. And they all compete who could carry the heaviest loads. And because they have this big strap on their forehead and this enormous pack on their back, and all they can see is their feet, you know. It's incredible to watch them. And they were so kind, you know. Lama Zopa gave me malas for all the people plus the Sherpas. So I gave these malas to these Sherpas. And you'd see them walking past with their massive packs and they'd just be holding their mala, you know. They had such faith. They were amazing. Anyway, Harry told me suddenly he's walking up this treacherous path, really treacherous. I mean, 1,000 feet drop. People fall over regularly and die in these places. And then he suddenly saw 4 Sherpas, porters, walking down with their great big packs on. And it was really intense and really close and no time to even think, you know. So Harry's been meditating for years in these mountains, doing every kind of thing we're talking about here. All the things we're talking about, he'd be doing the meditation, all of these, and realizing emptiness and realizing renunciation and realizing compassion and realizing bodhicitta. So he said to me, because I asked him about it, he said, as soon as he saw these 4 Sherpas, and it's really tight, really intense, really narrow, there's a big drop, and then there's the mountain. So he said, the first thought he had, okay, 4 of them, 1 of me, I'll step to the side. So he stepped to the edge of the cliff. Now that's not instinctive what we'd normally do. If you've never practiced, you would not do that. You'd go to the edge of the mountain, the edge of the wall, and hope they don't all fall off. But you'd never think 4 of them, 1 of me. So already even saying that indicated he's been a meditator. You know, he's trained his mind in this. The next second, he said to himself, because he saw it was so intense and so close, and they're coming down a steep hill, he said, if they knock me, I won't hold on. Now that's insane. Think about that. It would not come naturally. They were strangers, for God's sake. They weren't his children. Maybe for your children you might do that, but these were strangers. So clearly you can't just do this out of the blue. You know, like Helen's point's a really good point. If you've already done the work in a past life, Helen, you would do it automatically. It would be natural, but we've got to train in this. So then he said, he stood by the edge of the mountain, his feet are he's watching them, they're coming really close, his pack is on his back, and he said they did knock him, and he didn't hold on, and his feet are on the ground, and he feels himself falling. He said, I had a psychic vision of the entire fall. I saw my body crash to the ground. And then he said, halfway through his fall, his feet still on the ground, he felt the hands of Geshe Lama Konchog, and he forcefully pushed him, and then he reversed direction, and he fell into the path. So now, nobody could do that if you haven't practiced for years. So that's why all these meditations we're talking about, you see, we think meditations are to get an experience. Oh, I had such a special experience this morning. I had so much compassion for sentient beings. But that's just emotional. You're training yourself. Like when you go to the gym every day, you're training yourself. So meditators for years are training themselves in all these different points to the point where it becomes experiential. So clearly he's done tonglen. So what do you think? He put his money where his mouth was. And it was sincere. But the bonus, this is the power of holy beings. This is the power of beings who've become Buddha. They can even the lowest level bodhisattva can manifest their body wherever they damn well like in 100 different forms to benefit sentient beings. A Buddha's not just some nice guy sitting in the sky looking cute. They're manifesting their body in the mind in countless bodies. This is the power of the bodhisattva path, So Geshe Lama Konchog manifested and he saved Harry's life. That's the bonus. So who caused that? Harry did. His unbelievable bodhicitta. His happiness is simply give his life for others. That's tonglen, 100% top dog, you know. That's the result. So one step at a time, people. How about just giving a drop of blood to the mosquito? As Lama Zopa says, they only want one tiny, tiny drop of blood. So start with giving a drop of blood. Then you keep getting better. You graduate and you're able to give your body without a second thought. I love that story. It's so perfect.
Venerable Robina.
Yeah.
It's Linley here.
Yes, Linley.
Can I just tell a little story? Back in the early 90s, I lived in Kundi for 2 years.
Live where?
I worked at
Live where?
Kundi.
Where's that?
It's about 1 hour away from Harry's cave.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, so you know it's up there, do you? Okay, good. Wonderful. Go on.
So
Go on.
I met Harry.
Oh, good.
And the nun that you were
Mary.
talking about.
Mary.
Mary.
No, Mary. No, they're girlfriend and boyfriend now because Mary was a nun. But the nun, who was the nun that you met? The one was with him.
Mary.
It wasn't Mary. It was Sarah, I think, the nun who was with him. But who did you meet?
Oh,
his
I
girlfriend.
So I met Mary.
Okay, that's his
so
girlfriend. They're not monk and nun now.
Okay,
go on.
So we lived there for 2 years. So
what were you
met,
doing up there?
Harry. My husband and I are both doctors, so we were at.
I see. You were working up there.
Hillary's.
Amazing, wonderful. Okay,
Yeah.
go on.
So we got to meet them, and
Wonderful.
We visited both of their caves.
Wonderful. Wow.
Harry had a very basic cave.
Yes.
Mary had quite an elaborate cave.
I
It
know
was quite
Mary's was
beautiful.
really cute. I heard about that. Yes, nicely decorated.
But they had meeting them and talking to them had quite a profound effect on me.
Bet.
And I have but from that time, which was nearly 30 years ago until this year, that really I hadn't had anything to do with Buddhism.
Okay,
And
how interesting.
During lockdown, I decided to contact Harry and Mary. And
Oh, really?
They were very easy to. Yeah. So so we had a Zoom and had a wonderful catch up.
Oh, I love it.
And they are very special people.
It's absolutely right.
Yeah, so that's essentially, that's why
So they're your hook. They're the ones that hooked you. And now 30 years later, it ripened. How wonderful. Linley.
That took quite a long time.
That's
didn't
amazing.
It? But I'm very, very pleased.
That's
so
amazing.
It took a long time to come back onto the
So
path.
they're both in Colorado, you know that, and they've got and Mary's about to go into long retreat, and Harry's going to be the helper.
Yes.
And he had he had an
full
operation recently. They put a stent in whatever it is, and he's fine. He came out really well.
That's good to hear.
Yes, it is,
Yeah.
exactly. I saw them recently.
Anyway,
That's wonderful to
just
hear.
a little
Thank you,
story.
Linley. I'm very happy to hear that story. So you can imagine this. You can visualize this story happening. Yeah, amazing.
I can.
I believe it. Amazing. Thank you, Linley. I love that story. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll tell them. I'm only a couple of hours away. I'm in New Mexico, so I'm going to go up there before she starts a retreat. So I can tell her that I saw Linley and talked to Linley. She came to the course. Good.
Could you also give them a hug?
I absolutely will do that. I will do that with my mask on or whatever. Good. Thank you, Linley. That's wonderful to hear. Go. Okay. So anybody else? Any points on that? Any thoughts? But that's tonglen actual. But you've got to start somewhere. You start by imagining, taking upon yourself a little baby headache, and it just develops this amazing courage. Now talk about levels. You try now and give your life for somebody else. I'm sorry, you'll have a panic attack. So we can't, you've got to know where you're at. That's what I keep saying. You've got to know what weight you can carry. You've got to know what load you can do. You've got to know what practice you're capable of. I can't stress this enough, and this is really not usual for us when we think about compassion and things, We just think it's like an absolute thing, It's not. You grow it, like you grow your integrity. You grow your wisdom. You grow your compassion. That's the whole point that Buddha's saying, It's incremental, step by baby step. So, okay. So then the final verse is it talks about how I'm going to give up the 8 worldly dharmas and to see everything as illusory and to give up attachment. So illusory, so let's talk about emptiness now then, okay? What's the time? 1 hour to go, okay. So the culmination of the wisdom wing is when you've realized emptiness. The culmination of the compassion wing is when you realize bodhicitta. And the two of these together, that's the Buddha, you know. So, okay. So on the Mahayana path, there's two main modes. Okay, cancel on the Mahayana path, full stop. In Buddhism, there are two main modes of meditation. Thousands of techniques, formal techniques. And the first one is what the world thinks of as meditation, and it's broadly in the world, people call it mindfulness. And there are 47 varieties, you know, and people make up their own, and that's fine, because nobody owns the word meditation. Buddha has no copyright on it. He didn't create it. The Hindus invented this particular technique. But, you know, if you're saying you're going to do Buddhist meditation, you better be clear that it is Buddhist. People tend to make up their own stuff, you know, and that's okay, but don't call it Buddhist. It's very rude. So in Buddhism, there's two main modes of meditation. And these are taught on the Mahayana path at the final stages of the bodhisattva wing, when you are doing the 6 perfections of the bodhisattva. And maybe I'll go through those 6 perfections. That's the final. Once you've accomplished bodhicitta, the next stage for the bodhisattva is to go from life to life to life to life, perfecting the compassion wing in their relationship with sentient beings, life after life after life, perfecting generosity, morality, patience and perseverance. And then in the meditation, they're perfecting concentration and wisdom. And then eventually, when you've perfected all that, you've got the 2 wings and you're a Buddha now, babe, you know. So the 2 modes of meditation, they're the 6th and the 5th and the 6th of the 6 perfections on the bodhisattva path. The first one is, they're both known in terms of, they're both labeled in terms of their result. So the first one is called shamatha in Sanskrit. That's the end result. And it's called in English calm abiding. And in general, it's concentration. The term in Sanskrit is samadhi. There's different levels of this single-pointed concentration. And this is crucial. So this is what people think of as meditation. When you sit down there and you focus on something and you try not to follow your thoughts. So people think of this as meditation. So the trouble is, in our culture, there's many misconceptions, with great respect. First, we think of it as an alternative to a pill, which means you only do it when you're really losing the plot. That's absurd. You know, that's just completely crazy. It's a technique we need to learn as soon as we can, so we can develop the skill of concentration, so in our day-to-day life we can see what the hell is going on in this crazy mind of ours, in the most simple meaning. So then we also think of it as a technique where all the thoughts have to go away. And because we think of it as an alternative to a pill, we only go to do it when we're having a mental breakdown. We only go to do it when all the wheels are falling off, and that's just too late. The commonest thing people ask, the commonest thing we ask is, when I'm really angry with my boyfriend, what should I do? When I'm having a mental breakdown, what should I do? When I'm in bed inert with depression, what should I do? Well, that's as absurd as asking of having a car, a brand new, beautiful car, and you've never heard of mechanics. You've never heard of mechanics. You've never heard of maintenance. You've never heard of preventative mechanics. So you just drive your car to the ground, never paying attention to the wheels wobbling, never paying attention to all the things going wrong. And then one day at 120 k's an hour on the freeway, suddenly your wheels are falling off and you go, oh, what should I do? Well, how absurd, how idiotic, how completely ignorant. But that's how we are with our minds. We don't pay attention to the wheels wobbling. We don't notice the small. And that's the thing with people like Helen. Not Helen, who is it? Felicity, who isn't a shouter and a yeller like her sister. She's a pacifier. She tries to make everything nice. So it builds up all this inner tension. This is why they call it PTSD. It's just because she's not dealt with it until it becomes too late one day and she has a mental breakdown. Because we don't pay attention to our mind. We haven't heard of mental mechanics. We just wait till you want to go crazy, then you go to the doctor. No wonder we all lose the plot. No wonder we go crazy. No wonder we get depressed. No wonder we kill ourselves, because we don't have methods. You don't go to, if I'm in love with Paul, we're having a divine relationship, and then someone says, you should meditate, Robina. I'll say, what are you talking about? We're happy. You think about that. Or you should go to a therapist. You think, what the hell for? We're happy. Because we don't realise we're suffering. We don't realise the subtler level of suffering. We don't realise the wheels are wobbling. We wait till they fall off. It's just too late. I can't stress this enough. So the Buddha's view, you don't wait until the bad things happen. You don't wait for the wheels to fall off. You have maintenance. And you could say, if you really started early in your life, and it's still not too late, and you began with these techniques of observing your mind, observing your attachment, observing your anger, observing your anxiety, and knowing how to interpret it, and having techniques to cultivate, to counteract it, and having a practice morning and night, you could argue as you get older, you would never lose the plot. Because if you've got a really good mechanic, your car will last 20, 30 years. Wheels don't fall off cars. So you would never have a mental breakdown. This is astonishing for us in our culture, because we just think mental breakdowns are normal. Yeah, they're normal, but we're all insane, because we don't know how to deal with our mind until it's too late. So you don't wait till you want to kill your boyfriend or yourself before you start thinking you should do something about it. That's the Buddha's point. So meditation is not an alternative to a pill. It is not it is not a relaxation technique. There are wonderful relaxation techniques. Yoga has so many, and we need them. We're all demented. Please get relaxation techniques. But this technique is the opposite to relaxation. When you're really developed in it, you'll be blissfully relaxed, but it's not the purpose of it. The purpose isn't to make all the thoughts go away. When you've got single-pointed concentration, believe me, you will be at a subtler level of your mind, like Lama Yeshe talks about in Mahamudra. You'll be radiant and clear, and your mind will be as vast as space, as if you could count every atom, Lama Yeshe says. You'd have incredible joy. You'd have ecstasy, peaceful ecstasy. It's the nature of your mind. But that's the goal, that's the end result. But the technique that you're doing is the actual job you're doing, and we'll finish with a little bit today, in concentration meditation, in shamatha, is you're training your mind to stay on one thing. And of course, it's the hardest job to do in the universe. But that's what the technique is. You train your mind to stay on the breath, for example. The thoughts will come and go like crazy maniacs. You let them come and go. You don't say, oh, I had a bad meditation, I had a lot of thoughts. Well, join the universe, folks. It's the nature of our crazy mind. But you've got to train yourself. Here, this is the point. Why our thoughts never stop is because we keep having a dialogue with them. We keep putting fuel on the fire. So if you don't buy into your thoughts and you let them come and go like a bunch of crazy roommates who are shouting and yelling, and you don't pay attention to them, I don't mean ignore them. No, that's denial. But you don't buy into them, and you begin the skill to do that in your daily life on the basis of developing the skill to just pay attention to one thing, like the breath. You train yourself to stay on the breath. You let the thoughts come. You let the thoughts go. And in that way, as you progress in this meditation, the thoughts will begin to calm down because you're not buying into them. It's a very specific technique. And the sign of success is not that they all go away. That might be occasionally, you might have a quiet moment. That's very nice for you. But actually, in the texts, this process of single-pointed concentration is described in terms of 9 stages of development. And they say in the text, in the ancient Indian texts, that a sign of success is at the first of the 9, where you think your mind's getting worse. Well, your mind isn't getting worse. You're just paying attention to it. You never paid attention before. So the sign of success, 99% of us will not be like, for example, Venerable Renee or Harry, who go to the mountains and get realizations. That's the best way to do. You've got to give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and mortgages, and poodles, and families, and friends, and mummies, and daddies, and uncles, and aunties, and you disappear into the mountains. Best to become a monk or a nun. Then you will get concentration, maybe in a couple of years. Could be 10 years. That's the best way to do it. Best. But for most of us, we won't do that. So we do a little bit every morning, a little bit during the day. And the real benefit that comes from this technique isn't that maybe your mind calms down, isn't that you get concentration, is that because you're stepping out of your head and refusing to buy into the crazy thoughts, you just stay focused on that one point called your breath. Then you bring to bear into your daily life the skill that you learned. So then when you're sitting in the kitchen, whereas once you'd just be getting annoyed with your husband and suddenly you find the words vomiting out your mouth, telling him to shut up and eat his food quietly, you didn't notice your anger coming. But now, because you've trained your mind to watch the breath, you got it out of your head and you're hearing all the crazy thoughts, but you're not buying into them. You're getting some discipline. Then in your daily life, you go to the kitchen, you're doing the dishes, and you're noticing your anger arising. And you tell yourself, give it a break, Robina, shut your mouth, let him chew his coffee ever he wants it. You catch it before it comes out the mouth. So it's the ability to see what is going on in this mind of ours. You're stepping out of your head. Normally we're like this, immersed in the drama, and then not knowing what's going on until it's screaming at the level of emotion, you know. That's why you get PTSD, honey, because we don't deal with it when it's happening. You know. So concentration, we can all practice it. We'll do 5 minutes before we finish, you know, using Mahamudra, Lama Yeshe's little technique. So that's concentration. And if you get it, that's the end result, shamatha, this genius state where you've gone to a subtle level of mind, beyond your conceptual, beyond the sensory. We don't even posit such a state of mind as existing in our culture, you know. You've accessed this subtler level of your own mind, your own cognition. It's an incredible state of mind. And the Buddha says we've had it in many lifetimes, but we've lost the plot because we never used it in the second mode of meditation to get insight, vipassana, insight. In what case here? Into reality, emptiness, special insight. So Lord Buddha taught many vipassana techniques. And the purpose of all of them is to get insight into the different teachings. So one of them that's most popular in the world that's known as Vipassana, and people tend to think of it as the only one, but Buddha taught many. I think it's a technique where you use your concentration first, your first mode, you get some concentration, then you go to the second mode, and what you do with this focused mind is you start scanning the sensations of your body. Now, Buddha does not want us to get insight into our body. That's not his job. Why he wants us to scan with our concentrated mind the different sensations of the body is so we can get insight into impermanence, that things change. It's a really experiential little technique. But in the Mahayana path, the main one, as Lama Yeshe says, special insight, is insight into emptiness. So it's a more subtle technique. It's one of Buddha's techniques. There are many vipassanas. So one is concentration, which is the mere kind of, it's the honing of the mind, it's the training of the mind, it's the disciplining of the mind to make it go to this laser-like subtle level of single-pointed concentration, which itself has incredible benefits, like Lama Yeshe talks about in Mahamudra, but that's not the point, they're the bonus. The point of it, the only point of it for the Buddha, is you use it in the second mode, and because your mind is laser-like, you then use your different logical arguments, for example, dependent arising, in order to realize, to get insight into emptiness. That's the final goal. So there's 2 ways of meditating, millions of techniques. One is concentration, the method, the concentration, because to do anything properly, you've got to have concentration, don't you? Just to make a cake, if you forget that you put the eggs in, did I put the flour in yet, you'll be lost. You've got to get this laser-like focus, perfecting mindfulness, perfecting all these different parts of your mind, so your mind is brilliantly clear. You can't even conceive of the qualities. As Lama Yeshe said in Mahamudra, it's almost unimaginable. In the West, it's for sure unimaginable. But we've had this in countless lives, and people like you and me right now are in the mountains, metaphorically or actually, getting this concentration, and way more than that, like Harry, realizing emptiness, realizing bodhicitta. My goodness, you know. So, let's talk about emptiness. That's the culmination of the wisdom wing. Bodhicitta is the culmination of the compassion wing. These 2 together is Buddha. So all the way through, from the very beginning of Buddha's teachings, we learn that he's telling us that we suffer and cause others suffering because of layers upon layers upon layers of deeply held, primordially held, instinctive misconceptions about how things exist. We think things are permanent. In reality, they're impermanent. We think we're made by a creator. In fact, Buddha says we're made by ourselves. We think mummy and daddy make us. We think our mind is the brain and we track ourselves back to monkeys. No. Buddha says the law of karma is what runs the universe. He's not asking us to believe him. He might be wrong. You've got to prove it, baby. But this is his view from his own experience. He's telling us that's the view of reality. He's not being arrogant. Anybody's allowed to tell you what they think is real. Einstein tells us that E equals mc squared. He's not pussyfooting and saying, well, maybe it's not, and I don't want to be rude, perhaps it isn't. Tell him to shut up until he's certain, please. Then once he's certain, he will say, this is what I have found to be true. Now over to you, follow my methodology and you'll prove the same thing. He's not asking us to believe him. He's not asking us to swallow it whole. He didn't speculate. It's not coming from on high. It's his own observation, and he presents it. Buddha is exactly the same, So he's allowed to tell us what's true. Jesus says there's a creator. Muslims say there's a creator. They're allowed to say that, and they give us their methodology. That's up to us to prove it. We are the boss here, So Buddha's telling us what he thinks is true, that karma is the law that runs the universe, that your mind isn't the brain, that you don't come from a creator, that you don't come back from, track yourself back to the monkeys, all of these things. He says karma is the law that runs the universe. Impermanence is how things are, all these different realms of existence, compassion, emptiness, all these different views in Buddhism are what Buddha has found to be true. And he says, here's my methodology. You follow the same thing, you'll come to the same conclusion, and you'll become a Buddha. So that's the approach. So we need to get insight into all of these different things, not just emptiness, into all of these, and you use these two modes of meditation in order to do that. This is the ideal scenario, these formal meditations. But it doesn't mean we can't get insight every day. Just sitting on the toilet, and you're thinking about impermanence, you can get an insight into impermanence right there, a little flash of it. Nothing wrong with that. Okay, so from the day one, he's telling us we're driven by delusions. We're living in la-la land. We're not in touch with reality. That's his key point. And that's why we suffer. He says there's a big disconnect between how things are and how we see things. That's the insanity of samsara. So the method to get happy and the method to quit suffering is to get wisdom at different levels. And the ideal scenario, the most quick method, is to do it in the basis of single point of concentration, when your mind is laser-like, sharp and subtle and super capable. But it doesn't mean we don't do it throughout the day at our conceptual level. We do it every second of the day. We're working on our mind every day. So he's telling us that karma is the way things are. He's telling us that impermanence is the way things are. He's telling us that other realms of existence is the way things are. He's telling us this is what happiness is and this is what suffering is. All his teachings are his presentation of how things are. Finally, and everything leads inexorably to this final one of how things are ultimately. And we do all the work previously that leads us to be able to understand this one that's more primordial, that's more subtle. So, okay. There's different methods of presenting how things exist ultimately. But the one that Tsongkhapa, our lineage Lama from the 14th century, loves, is the one that's, as Lama Yeshe says, it's the king of logics to prove emptiness. It's using the framework of the two truths. Okay? The Buddha's saying that billions and trillions of phenomena exist in this universe. Billions and trillions of distinct, different phenomena. So they all have their own conventional truth. Each thing has its own conventional character. And he's telling us that with all these misconceptions in our mind, in particular, the deepest misconception is the one, this ignorance, it's called mahripa, unawareness. It has this it makes the primordial mistake about the final fundamental ontological status of every single thing. We dump onto these things, these layers and layers of mistakes. So the deepest one, this one that's called ignorance, the root delusion, lays on top of everything an intrinsic nature that they simply don't have. So of course this is abstract for us. Who ever thought of these words? We didn't hear this, So the conventional reality, conventional truth is there's a computer, a lamp, a cup, a thermos, a person. There's all these millions of phenomena. So that if we're getting all these phenomena wrong, we better first establish how they exist, even conventionally, first. So let's just discuss the phenomenon called I. This is our favorite phenomenon. So the word I, the word person, the word me are all synonymous. So a dog is a person. A Buddha is a person. A human is a person. So we are a person. We're not a lamp. We're not a toilet. We might treat ourselves like one, but we're not. We're not a cup. We're a person. We fit the definition of a person. And I forgot the definition, but never mind. And this is crucial, to know the definition of something. Because let's just say, I always use the same example. So I say, Mummy, what's that? Well, darling, it's called a thermos. So what's a thermos? So she has to give me a definition, doesn't she? She's got to give me a definition. So a definition has two parts. The first part tells you its conventional characteristics. So she'll say, well, look, darling, can you see it's this flat-bottomed metal container? And I hear that and I see that pretty good, but I'm not happy yet. I don't know what it is in its bones. And this is a crucial point when it comes to understanding the two truths. What is its function, Mummy? What does it do? What's its meaning? So she'll say, well, sweetheart, it keeps my tea warm. So now I know the definition of a thermos. But she's got to prove it to me. You don't just believe what she tells you, and we believe everything everyone tells us. We're lazy, So she has to prove it is that. She has to prove it fulfills its function. So what she'll do is she'll get the tea, and she'll pour it in, and she'll put the lid on, and we'll wait 3 hours, and she'll take the lid off, and the tea will still be hot. Now she has proved it is that. This is really crucial. But more than that, she has to make sure there's no other definition in the world that we occupy that contradicts that. Now we've ticked the boxes. We all agree that's a thermos. What's that colour, Mummy? That's black. We agree upon it. We each sign the dotted line. We shake hands and we agree. This is called communication. This is called defining things at a conventional level. And if we got this correct, already we'd be blissful with each other. But look what happens. We're good at that with science. But I tell Paul, I love you, and he says, Robina, I love you, and we think we are agreeing. He's got one definition, and I have a completely different one. No wonder we fight, When it comes to emotional things, there's no clarity about definitions. With cups and thermoses and ones and twos, we're pretty good at it. We don't have a war over 1 + 1 is 2. We all agree. So conventional reality is really powerful. Get clear first. Now we can begin to take that phenomenon, the person in this case, and start to analyze how it exists actually, conventionally, why, in order to prove its ultimate reality, which is that, and this is the ultimate one, that it is empty of an intrinsic nature. So we hear that, I am empty of an intrinsic nature. We go like, who cares? Who's thought of this? Who ever thought the opposite? Whoever thought that I have an intrinsic nature? But that's Buddha's point. He tells us nothing has an intrinsic nature because he's saying this is the mistake that we make. Now, we can understand the mistake of attachment. We can analyze really clearly that cake that I'm so attached to, attachment makes it look delicious, way more delicious than it really is. Attachment makes me believe that when I get it, I'll get happy. It's that we can see it's a lie. We can prove that one, that attachment projects nonsense onto the cake. Well, ignorance, the root delusion, beneath attachment and all the others, this puts this deeper, more primordial lie. And because it's so primordial, we don't even recognize our mind is doing it. We just don't. We can understand attachment, but this one we can't get. It's so primordial. So that's the one we have to uproot. Once you have uprooted that lie, that from that second, you climb out of your samsara and you proceed to climb into your nirvana. You've got more work to do, but you can never fall back after that. You can even lose bodhicitta, but you can never lose realization of emptiness. This is the crucial one. So, okay, let's do a little bit of logical analysis to prove how there is no intrinsic I in here. So there's lots of little arguments and debates we have to do, you know. So one of them, for example, they talk about if there's something exists, this sounds so abstract to us, but just persevere with me. If something exists, it's either one thing or there's more than one. That's it. But we think, yeah, okay, let's do that. I'll do a simple example. Okay. First of all, before we go there, Buddha diverged from the Hindus from various points of view. He went as far as he could go to the subtlest levels, the deepest, the highest levels of achieving what they call samadhi, the subtlest state of concentration, where they would say you've realized you've achieved the perfection now. You can't go further. Buddha discovered there is still further to go. He's discovered the highest beings in the formless realms of samsara have given up the grosser suffering, given up the middle suffering, but they still have got the all-pervasive suffering because they haven't realized the ultimate nature of reality. So he diverged, mainly from that point of view, he diverged in his own direction in relation to his own direct experiential findings about the nature of self and the nature of everything that exists. That's where we began to get Buddhism, you know. So okay, so in this different, so then the conventional truth, the shorthand for that is dependent arising, interdependence, dependent origination. In other words, Buddha's saying everything that exists, every conventional phenomena that exists, necessarily, exists in dependence upon many different factors. In fact, many. But he narrows, he in his particular arguments with the previous views, he took 3 different levels of dependent arising. The grossest one, the more subtle, and then the subtlest. So the first one, and this is arguing with a particular position about the nature of self. Self, Atman, is the Sanskrit for the Hindu view, and there's many variations of that, but the Christians would call that a soul. The Greeks might call it an essence. There's something permanent, uncaused, intrinsic, pointable, findable in there that causes us to be who we are. This is the first argument Buddha has. He says there can be no such thing, not a possibility. So all the extensive debates and meditations to not just to be argumentative, but to prove something can't exist like this. So that would include the soul, but also it would include a creator. Buddha has much debate and analysis about the nature of a creator that has no cause and is permanent and unchanging. Not a possibility, he says. And there's detailed descriptions in meditation that we need to do. So the first argument is that everything that exists in the conventional world that we know is impermanent, and it is the product of causes. It comes into existence in dependence upon countless causes. That's the first one. Now that's karma for the self already, that I, instead of thinking I didn't ask to get born, I'm made by my parents, I'm this innocent victim. No, you're the product of countless past causes. Already this is loosening the grip of ego grasping. The next level, and what I'm going to talk about now, this is the next subtle one, not the subtlest, but it leads to the subtlest, is that I, in this case I, the self, exists in dependence upon countless parts. So we go, well, yeah, we know that, so what? But listen, this is a really powerful argument, this one. In other words, we're all made up of billions of different bits and pieces, aren't we? Everything we can think of is made up of bits. Even a moment of anger, there's this millisecond of anger and the next millisecond of anger and the next millisecond of anger. There's nothing that doesn't have parts. There's nothing you can't break down into its component parts. And this is arguing with a major position that the Hindus took. So then there's either 2 ways we think this I exists. So we can see we're made up of parts. And what are we made up of? Billions of bits of the body and billions of bits of the mind. But we believe, he says, due to this ignorance, due to this marimpa, known colloquially when it grasps at the self as ego grasping, we believe 1,000,000,000% that in here somewhere, walking hand in hand with all the other parts, as our friend Paul's and my friend Corpende says, We believe intrinsically and utterly and completely that there is a very special part in here called I. So I like to use the example of IKEA. You go to IKEA and you buy, you buy a table. We know it will not come as a table. It'll come as a bunch of parts. It's a really good example. It comes as a bunch of parts. Now we know those parts have been chosen very carefully. They don't just chuck in 47 screws and cross their finger. They chuck in exactly the right screws and exactly the right number of legs and exactly the right this and that. We know that. And then you put them together and you magically get a table. We know that. Well, guess what? You go to IKEA and you want to buy a Robina. You want to buy a Marie. You want to buy a Fernando. You want to buy a Paul. So you get a box and it gets delivered. And you start putting all the parts together. Now think of this. You've got the legs and the nose and the eyes and the ear and all the joints and the pee-pee and the caca and all the millions of bits of your mind, your anger. There's been millions of parts. And each one would be very precise because each one has its own function. And then eventually, as you keep looking and all the parts gradually constructing this Robina, and then you're convinced that there must be a special part in there somewhere that you haven't found yet that is called I, without which there wouldn't be a Robina. It's like a little magic thing you put in there, then now it becomes Robina. We believe there is one piece like that. We say it every day. We think of it as the owner. We think of it as the possessor. We think of it as the person who gets insulted, the person who wants something. I is our favorite word. Everything is surrounded by the term I. So this is the point now I'm getting to. Let's just do some logical proof to show there isn't a separate independent piece called I. This is the argument about a soul. Literally, the Christians would say there is a body, there is a mind, and there is a soul. Buddha says you don't need one of those. You don't need one. All the bits do fine on their own, he's saying. So, well, I always use the same examples. I just tell you that I have. So if there's this one and many business, this one and many argument. So I'll tell you, there's the first phenomenon called I. This is this one here. Then there's a thermos. I say, I have a thermos and a mala. So as I say those words, you will look and you will hear and you will check immediately. You will verify, did I speak the truth? That's how we communicate with each other. So you'll count the phenomena. So there are 3 phenomena I mentioned. One is called Robina, I, one is called thermos, and one is called mala. So it is pretty easy to prove there are 3 phenomena. So the way you prove there are 3 phenomena is you'd have to find a thermos that isn't a Robina or a mala. You'd have to find a Robina that isn't a thermos. I just said that you'd have to find a mala that isn't a Robina or a thermos. You'd have to find a thermos that isn't a Robina and a mala. So you find 3 separate, in this case, and independent phenomena. And what that means is the mala will break. The thermos is fine. Robina drops dead. The thermos and the mala continue to exist. So they don't depend upon each other in any shape or form. So they are both separate and independent. It's really easy to see. Now I'll make another statement, and this gets more nuanced. I will say that I have a nose and an ear. Now, without analysis, you will see that's absolutely true. You'll see it's true. You'll check, you'll look, and you'll see there is an ear. And you will see there is a nose. Now, that's 2 of the phenomena, isn't it? What about the third phenomenon? Now, we believe you will find the third one in here somewhere, walking hand in hand with the nose and the ear and the this and the hair and the pee-pee and the caca and the neck and the knee, etc. And it's called that special piece called I, somewhere around here. Our words express it every day. And Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. Of course it's not. So we've got to prove it. So if one argument is so perfect, if there were a separate little piece in there called the I that's like the owner, Like I said, I have a mala and a thermos. I'm saying I have an ear and a nose, but you've got to point out the eye. First, you've got to point out the owner. And that means you've got to point out the owner that isn't the thermos and that isn't the mala. So here we've got to point out an owner that isn't the ear and that is not the nose and indeed is not this and is not the hair and is not the forehead and is not the wrist and is not the other millions of bits. But we don't do this analysis. We just assume there is an I in there somewhere that gets injured and offended and upset and gets PTSD or whatever diseases we've all got. Join the universe, babies. That gets angry, that gets fearful, that gets this, that gets loving, that is kind. You know, Paul says, you've got an ugly nose, Robina. And I'll say, don't you dare insult me. And he will say, Robina, I didn't insult you. I insulted your nose. We'll laugh. So the first mistake we make, we believe there is a separate piece in there, like in the IKEA box that you've got to find that makes the whole Robina work. It's like this. This is the I, that we believe there is a part called I. That's exactly what the Christians say. This is a gross example. Now, the point is this. If there were a separate independent I in there, if there were, when Paul insults my nose, when my nose gets hurt, there's pain in my nose. Now, we know that the ear is not dependent on the nose. My ear will keep listening and hearing and will not feel pain when the nose is hurt. If my ear gets boxed and it's bleeding, my nose is fine because they're both independent and separate. Now, what about the third component called I? If there were a third component, like a nose and an ear and an eye, a me, an I, that is separate and independent, when Paul insults my nose or my nose gets hurt, my eye will watch and go, phew, I'm glad it wasn't me that he insulted. I am not feeling pain. The nose is feeling pain. The ear is feeling pain. So when, the Tibetans, you see, especially that lovely story, I haven't told you, there's another story about up in Laudo, a wonderful story about Lama Zopa and his little boy. I'll tell the story in a minute. But the way they talk, you learn to say, we say, my nose, my head, my neck. They would say the neck, the head, the nose. You become more objective. There is anger, not my anger. This my and I looms so large for us. And we are literally, Buddha says, because of this ego grasping, giving it massive status that it actually doesn't have. So we've got to be so much more precise. So the point is, if there were another piece called I, it would not mind when the nose hurts. It would not mind when the ear hurts, just like the ear doesn't mind when the nose gets hurt. But we know it's not true. We know I do get hurt. So this is where it's more nuanced. There is an I, but you can't point it out. You can't separate it. So it's not, as Lama Zopa says, the I is not separate from the nose and the ear, but it's different. In the thermos and the mala and the Robina, they're both separate and independent. But this I does exist, but not the way we think. It's more subtle. It's not even like it's more subtle like with a microscope. You can't pin it down. Look at that. This is a simple example. I will say to you, the thermos has a base. Now that's a fact. Look at that. Don't argue. It's a fact. But now let's do the analysis. I just said two nouns, thermos and base. If there are two nouns, there must be two phenomena that you have to point out. Listen to this. And that are separate. Listen. There's the base. And a base is a round piece of metal that is sealed to the parts up here so the tea doesn't leak out. We know that is the base. Now, please, remove the base. There is a round piece of metal in my right hand. Now, where is the thermos now? There is no such thing as a thermos. Because why? Because thermos is the name we give to when all the parts are working nicely. But you can't extract the thermosness from it. You cannot find a thermos there, but there is a thermos there, but not like we think. The same with the I. The I is not the ear. The I is not, this is another argument. Okay, one is we think there's a separate I that's the owner. But the other one, which we also now have to argue with, which I've begun to do with the cup, the other argument is we think the I is all of me. Or it's all I. Well, if my nose is my eye and my ear is my eye and all the bits and pieces are my eye, why would I say I have a body? If body is equivalent to I and they're the same thing, they'd have to be the same. You wouldn't be able to separate them. There's either one or there's more than one. So if the I is all of me, that means the I is the body and the mind. That means why would I say I have a mind? I have a body. It's like saying I have an eye, body has a body. It's completely useless, ridiculous. And as many parts as you'll find is as many eyes there'll be. We've got to use logic. This is not just being clever, This is because ego grasping is so primordially believing in an intrinsic I since beginningless time. We've got to use much logical analysis to break it down, first at a conceptual level, but finally only this can be realized in a subtle level of single point of concentration. The conceptual mind is not profound enough to realize emptiness. But you start where we are, with the conceptual, So this leads us to the final dependent arising, which is the real meaning, which is that I is a name. Thermos is a name that we give to the appropriate parts. The parts have to be valid. You can't just call a lamp an eye. You've got to define your terms first. So then this is how Lama Zopa puts it. This is the two truths. One is called the ultimate truth, and the shorthand for that is the word emptiness. Then you've got the conventional truth, and the shorthand for that is the term dependent arising. So right now we have the two wrong views, Buddha says. Tsongkhapa says. We have the two extreme views. So every time we hear that there is no I from its own side, that I is completely lacking an intrinsic nature, that I is empty of existing from its own side, all these synonyms. When we hear that, we fall, as Tsongkhapa says, we fall into the abyss of the great mistake, and we think, oh, well, there's no I might as well kill myself. That's nihilism, and that's the commonest mistake we all make when we hear the word I, Emptiness. Complete mistake. We're going to discuss the word emptiness in a minute to get an understanding of it. And then we hear dependent arising, that there is an I that does exist in dependence upon causes, conditions, parts, etc., etc., etc. And as soon as we hear that, we over-exaggerate it. And we go, oh, thank God there's an I after all. Grasp. And we go like drunken sailors between these two extreme views. So the middle way is when we begin to bring these views together. And that's why Lama Yeshe says, dependent arising is the king of logics to prove emptiness. So when we're in the right track, whenever we hear emptiness, we hear dependent arising. When we hear dependent arising, we hear emptiness. And eventually, when we're a Buddha, these two come together as one experience. That's the final middle way, So the commonest mistake, like I said, when we hear emptiness, the commonest mistake in the literature, in people's views, and we can be forgiven for thinking it means this. It sounds like that. When Lama Zopa says that from the side of the thermos, there is not one atom of anything there that makes it a thermos. There's not one atom of anything here that makes it an I. Of course, we can't hear it but to think, well, there must be no I. And this is the interesting point. When we do the parts analysis like we did before, the fact is Buddha's saying you will not find a piece called I. You won't find a piece among the other pieces. Among the pieces of Robina, you will find a nose, an ear, an eye, hair, forehead, skin, the billions of pieces. You will find those, relatively speaking, in the package called Robina. But we think there's this extra piece called I in that box from IKEA, that there wouldn't be a Robina until you got it. That's the impulse, that's the instinct, you know. So the Buddha's saying, and that's why we have to do the much analysis, first intellectually and then with meditation. And you literally, Buddha says, I'm telling a baby you won't find one, but don't believe me, you've got to prove it. So the major meditation is to literally, it sounds hilarious, is to literally search for this intrinsic little I in among the parts. This is the meditation. It's hilarious, it sounds to us. And the fact is, you will not find a piece called I. But that is not, as His Holiness says, that's not the real premise. And this is the point now. That's not the real premise. You won't find an I when you search, but that's not the real premise. In other words, the I is not empty of intrinsic existence because you can't find an I, and you won't. I is empty of intrinsic existence because it's a dependent arising. You've got to have the two truths. And the final dependent arising is that everything exists in dependence upon the mind calling it that. When we've got these two together, we're on the right track, you know, because you can't have one without the other. So let's look at the word. Got time. Let's look at the word empty. It's so important. It's so practical, so down to earth, this word, but we so confuse it, you know. So I use simple examples every time. We will say, I'll go to drink my tea. I'll go like this, and I'll go, my thermos is empty. We know what that means, because you know what exists in thermoses is tea, let's say. So my thermos is empty. Of what, Robina? Of tea. That's easy to understand. You look in your bank account and you're expecting your $5,000 there because you want to come on the Laudo trek with me and you're all excited. And you go in the bank account and there's a zero there. You get the shock of your life. You won't see zero. You will go, oh my God, where's my $5,000? My bank account is empty of my precious $5,000. We get this. We hear it. So the correct way to put it, using Buddhist way of describing, because the mind, you see, the mind always cognizes a thing, like a noun. That's how the mind cognizes things. An event, an action, an object. So if I look in my thermos, and I look in there, and I will see I'll see tea. So there is tea. So tea is a phenomenon, isn't it? Tea is an object of my mind. The mind is the subject, and it always cognizes objects. Object is not meaning a physical thing. Whatever the mind cognizes is the object of the mind. So the mind always cognizes a thing, a noun. I like to put it like that. So my mind looks in the thermos, my eyes see shape and color, and then conceptually I deduce it's tea. So there is tea in my thermos. We get that. And I observe tea in my thermos. Now, if I go to drink and I go, oh, my thermos is empty. We know it means tea. You don't think your thermos is empty of an elephant, you know, or of anything else. And this is the interesting point, and this is a really crucial one when it comes to realizing the emptiness of the I. Think this point. The only person who would say, when they pick up this thermos and then go, oh my God, the thermos is empty, the only person who would say that is a person who expects tea to be there. You go into the shop where they sell thermoses, you won't open the lid and say, oh my goodness, the thermos is empty, because you don't expect tea to be there. If you don't expect $5,000, you're not surprised when you see there's nothing there. You don't see so this is the point. So what does my mind cognize? Because I expect tea. If I'm married to Paul for 47 years and one day I come home and there's a note, I've left you for a younger version, guess what I'm going to notice in that house for God knows how long is the emptiness of Paul. If you came to visit me and you'd never heard of Paul, you would never in a million years ever cognize the phenomenon called the emptiness of Paul. But isn't that a vivid phenomenon for me? Because I'm expecting Paul. I wish he was there. So all I do is see the absence of Paul in my house. We get this. Now, these are horrible emptinesses. I want tea. I want Paul. I want $5,000. But I'm trying to get around that you turn the phrase, oh, my cup is empty, into in a noun phrase. So the mind, because the mind will cognize the phenomenon called the absence of tea in my cup. My mind will, on the basis of expecting $5,000, my mind will cognize the phenomenon in my bank account of the absence of my precious $5,000. Every time I come home, I will vividly be cognizing every second the absence of my precious Paul, who I want to be there, but who's not. So the emptiness of something in this way is only cognized by a person who thought or expected or wanted the thing that isn't there to be there. So Buddha's telling us that for eons we've been believing in a real, intrinsic, absolute, definite, pointable, findable object called I, in here somewhere, that is running the show, that is the experiencer, that feels the pain, that does the actions. It's a real little puppeteer in there running the universe. We believe, it's a gross way to put it, we believe there's something in there. So when you've got single point of concentration and done your years and years of debating and meditating and analysis every day in your daily life, arguing with this ridiculous view, and in your single point of concentration, at some point you will have the first direct, real, definite cognition that I does not exist there. Has never, doesn't, and could never. That's your first non-conceptual insight into emptiness. And from that second, you cut the root of samsara. You've got more work to do, baby, but you cannot fall back after that. So the thing you cognize is a real, vivid phenomenon called the absence of this precious self-existent me. It's not nothingness. That's demented. So as it says in the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness. A Buddha basically is listing all these different phenomena that exist in the universe. And he says in one of the first sentences, Shariputra says, or Avalokitesvara says, he's really just channeling Buddha's words. Buddha's in meditation. He's channeling his thoughts into the mind, into the mouths of Avalokitesvara and Shariputra. And so Shariputra takes the first group of categories, Avalokitesvara, called the five aggregates, which is what Buddha says we're made up of, these five things. And the first one's called form, which is like the physical. So he says form is empty. Emptiness is form. Form is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than form. So what he means by that is that emptiness of intrinsic existence of form is a characteristic of conventional form. So conventional form is here, and then emptiness is here. So to spell it out, wherever there is form, you will find right there on that conventional form a characteristic called the absence, the emptiness of intrinsic form. And so the absence of intrinsic form exists exactly where there is form. So it has got nothing to do with there is no form. This is nihilism. Emptiness of intrinsic character is the quality of everything that exists conventionally. So when you realize, when you say form, your conventional form, you're saying at the same time there exists right there the absence of inherent form. And whenever you talk about the absence of inherent form, you've got to find form, that the conventional form that has the characteristic of emptiness. So emptiness is a characteristic of everything that exists. So tea can exist. $5,000 can exist. Paul could exist in my house. But this one, an intrinsic I, can never exist. It's a complete, total fabrication. So these are just simple examples of the way we use the word emptiness, you know. So dependent arising and emptiness are the flip sides of the same coin. Whereas extreme views, we either believe there's something or there's nothing. And this is completely wrong, you know. So we've got 7 minutes to go. Ask me some questions if you'd like to. So understanding this, realizing this, this is what cuts the root of all the rubbish. And everything else from junior school to high school to university leads us to this. Any questions, people, before I run out of voice? Come on, any questions?
Venerable, you said you wanted to quote another little story from the mountains. Do you remember?
No, I think I did. I was going to read from Lama Yeshe's book. I never did that.
Okay.
Anyway, I'll see if I can. I quoted from it in my mind to you a few words. I didn't actually. Oh no, Lama Zopa. Yeah, Lama Zopa. Oh, yeah, good. This is a perfect. Thank you. Yes, it's the perfect story to end on. But I want to get questions first. Perfect story to end on. Exactly expressing what I'm talking about. Because the point is, when you've realised this emptiness, which sounds so intellectual, what do you think you've accomplished? You've cut the root of all samsara, baby. You've cut attachment. You've cut ego. You've cut misery. You've cut all fear. You are now blissful. You've got more work to do, but you can't go back after that. It's stupendous. So I will end with the story. You're absolutely right. I forgot completely. But I want your questions first, if there are any. No?
I would have a little question, Venerable.
What is it, darling? Talk to me.
You said if Paul, let's call him David, so we don't use
Doesn't
Paul.
matter. Go on,
If we get angry on the way he likes to drink his coffee, and we don't want to lash out because we control speech, and is it okay or wisdom or not to remove myself then from the situation?
Thank you, Shadina. Everything is a question of what we can handle. So if you're so fragile, I'm not being rude, if you're so fragile and so distressed and so upset, even when your husband drinks his tea the wrong way, then if you can't handle it, you need to remove yourself. This is super intelligent. And this is why I tell you, I joke about it, but I don't joke. Because we're so unconscious in our planet. This is why I quote this from the UN or something. There's a number that says that 40% of all women who get murdered are murdered by the bloke in the same bed. And this is not about men. This is about demented unawareness of our mind, attachment not getting what it wants, suppressing our anger, suppressing our guilt, and the husband going crazy, the wife going crazy, and usually, some people, sometimes the woman kills the husband, usually the stronger one kills the wife. We see this because we're all unconscious. So if we had a millimetre of bloody common sense, anybody with awareness would realise they can't handle this, not blaming the hubby, but they get the hell out. But we don't. We wait till we're dead. It shows how insane we are. Do you hear my point, Sadina? That's your first level of practice.
Absolutely.
Honey, if you're a bodhisattva level, you would rather live with some peanut who makes burps and farts and rapes you daily. And I'm not joking. If you're such a bodhisattva, you know there's some benefit. This is your practice. But first level, you've got to know where you're at, baby. And if you can't handle it, get the hell out of it. But we don't even know how to do that. We just live in this nightmare. So whether it's our boss or our boyfriend, so the thing is, there's two options in the end, and I've mentioned this. You either stay and work on your mind, which is stupendous, or you get the hell out. But we can make neither decision. Why don't you leave your husband? Oh, no, I couldn't do this. As Oprah said, I quote Oprah, she said, most women say, oh, he's better than nothing. Because we're terrified of leaving. We won't get another boyfriend. I don't know what to do on my own. I can't do that. The world will think badly of me. We are paralysed. And then you say, well, you could try and change your mind. Oh, no, I can't do that. He's evil. So we stay mad. We go insane. And that's why my friends in prison, I have such admiration for them, because they don't have the luxury to leave. So they change their mind. So it's powerful. So the intelligent one is, if you recognise you can't handle, get the hell out of there as quickly as possible, including the job. But that takes courage. Just that takes courage, Absolutely, Sadina. Absolutely. It's intelligence.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah. What else, people? Any questions about emptiness? Any questions about emptiness? No questions about emptiness? Anybody?
There's a question in the chat.
Go on, what is it?
Is the I in the brain or is the I in the mind?
We just said there isn't one. There isn't one. Speaking really uncomplicatedly, there is not an intrinsic separate little piece called I. Just the whole point. So ask me another question, please. There isn't one. There is one. There is an I, but it's more nuanced and subtle. Listen, there is here a thermos that does function to hold my tea, but if you start searching for the essential component, the essential thermosness, you won't find it. That's why, as Lama Zopa says, when we have realized the emptiness of the I, it's as if there is no I, ultimately. But conventionally, there is an I. But what does exist, I'm sorry, is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. So this is not just being clever yogi talk. This is literal, but it's extremely nuanced. We have to get the meaning. And this is what the tricky part is, because we think it's two options. Either there is or there isn't. Make up your mind, Buddha. It's more nuanced than that. It's not being tricky. So Lama's here. What?
So with that, just using it like when we've got delusions, then using like posing, how would we say something like, where is the I that's angry or something like that?
So start that whole sentence again. I think I missed a little bit, darling.
So using it like when we've got a delusion arising, like using emptiness, how are we going to use it as a remedy directly?
Oh, as a tool. No, it's a difficult practice until we really comprehend. But it is a very powerful one, as I say. We'll search for the I that feels the anger. Search for the I that is blissfully happy. Search for the I that's been offended. Of course, it's a powerful one. This is part of the process. But we sort of have to know what we're doing. Otherwise, you just get puzzled, So that's why we have to study it and think about it. Yeah, it's very powerful. It's very powerful. Exactly right. Like that. But it's really a tough one to realize. It's not that easy. It doesn't come. Might get a flash every now and again, But it's really, and this is the end result of all the other work we're talking about, So
when it mentions true existence and inherent existence.
I beg your pardon, Nicole. Sorry, what?
What's the difference between true existence and inherent?
No, in our tradition, there are many, many synonyms for how things don't exist. One is true existence, one is inherent existence, one is existing from its own side, one is intrinsic existence, one is existing in and of itself. There are many different synonyms. They all refer to the same thing. That's the I, that's how we think things do exist. And of course this is abstract for us. Whoever learned that you thought you had an intrinsic I? It's like a joke, isn't it? So we have to learn what it means first. And that's why Buddha says we have to first establish what we think an inherent I would be if it existed. Then we can see the emptiness of it. So there's a lot of work to do internally, Yes. So there's one more story. I'll finish with the story, okay? About Lama Zopa. So he's renowned as this, the reincarnation of Kunsang Yeshe, this Sherpa yogi, who passed away in 1940-something, whatever. And he lived up in the mountains up there, and he was a layman, and then he was a meditator, and in the last few years of his life, 20 years or so, he moved into this little place where they stored the radishes, apparently. That's the meaning of the word laudo, which is known now as Laudo. And it was a little place where they stored radishes. So he pulled the radishes out and he moved in, basically. It was a cave. So he meditated there the last 20 years of his life. He's a great tantric yogi. So he then passed away and then was reborn. He was recognized later as a little boy, when Little Zopa. I don't know what his name was then. It wasn't Tupten Zopa, but I'll call him Little Zopa. He was a little boy, and his sister, I'm supposed to be writing Rinpoche's biography. I hope I do it soon, because I'm going to be dead soon. So anyway, I hope I get it done soon. I haven't started yet. It's just cooking in my head right now. So anyway, I interviewed his sister and many different people about him. And since he's a little tiny boy, apparently, because she runs the place up there, this Laudo cave. There's a cave there and a monastery, and there's a retreat centre. That's where we go when we do our trek. And she's been doing it for 60 years. She's unbelievable. This wonderful nun, Samten. So, yeah. And he's Samten. So anyway, she I interviewed her about him, and she said from the time he was tiny, she was about 6 when he was born, he always acted kind of different, sort of like he always played games as if he were a lama, and he made mud pie dorjies and mud pie bells and mud pie torma cakes. He talked about how his benefactors were coming to his puja. He acted very unusual, like he remembered a past life, and apparently every time Mummy turned her back, little Zopa would be gone, even when he could crawl. And they'd find little bare-bottomed Zopa crawling up the hill to where they knew the cave of the Laudo Lama was, an hour or so up from there. And they'd drag him home. And then from the time he could talk, he'd be always walking up there. And his mummy would say, come home. He'd say, no, that is my home. And he'd acted like he was the Laudo Lama. So the mummy figured she better check up who he is and everything. So, they check up with the local Lama. He does his divinations. And yes, indeed, it came out that he does seem to be the reincarnation of the Laudo Lama. Anyway, when he was about 8, this is the story I want to tell you. He told this story years ago. And he was up in some place called Rowaling. You'd know that, I think, Lindy. Where are you? She's gone. Anyway, whatever. There she is, Lindley. All right. So he was up there. He's about 8 years old. It would have been about 1952 or something. And he was with his manager. They're very professional, these people. He's handed over to this monastery and a manager. And so you see there's this big, rough, powerful river up there. These rivers are very tumultuous. And there's this rickety bridge. And he sees these weird-looking people on the other side of the river. He said they were they had pale eyes, straw-coloured hair, pale skin. Well, it's white people, right? Sounds like Swedish people. Anyway, white people. And he'd never seen white people before. But he wanted to meet them, So he went over with his bowl of potatoes across this rickety bridge, and he fell in the water. And these rivers are really torrential. I mean, I've never seen them. So, so he's drowning, basically, with his potatoes, They don't teach him swimming up there. So this is how Rinpoche told the story. So he said, so first of all, if he is a reincarnated Lama and he's got this, they have retained their memory, that means he's in charge of his life. He chose his rebirth. They're completely in control of the whole death process. They know exactly where they're going to be born. Well, they're in charge. They're basically in charge. And we can all become that, No mucking around. So anyway, he's falling, he's drowning in the water. And this is how he told the story. He said, the head kept coming to the surface. Now we'd say, I came to the surface, but the head, quite rational, He saw his manager running up and down the bank, freaking out, having a panic attack, He can't lose a little Rinpoche. So anyway, then he kept going down again, and then he said to himself, the thought occurred to me that the person known as the Laudo Lama, not I, he said, is about to die. Then he said, I didn't know anything about emptiness, meaning in that life he'd never heard the teachings. But we can deduce from his behaviour and the way he talked that emptiness was a realisation in his mind. Because once you've got it, you can never lose it. You've cut the root of I and all suffering. You've got more work to do, but you can't go back. You've cut the root. So you can't lose that, He said, I didn't know anything about emptiness, but there was no fear. So this is the thing that seems so shocking to us in our world, that once you realise emptiness, even before you realise emptiness, even as you lessen, and this is my point too, where are you? PTSD. Where are you? There you go, darling. Felicity, your pictures keep moving. I never can find you. So I'm not being rude about your PTSD. I'm just talking how we talk as a Buddhist. That as we work on our minds, Felicity, as we control our body and as we control our speech, and then we go to high school, and as we get some concentration, as we begin to distinguish attachment and argue with it, and begin to distinguish aversion and argue with it, and begin to see jealousy and argue with it, this is the job we can do day to day. And I promise you, Felicity, a person like me, if I started to do that, I will not get angry. And a person like you who would do that, you would never get PTSD, because we would deal with what arises as and when it comes. Can you hear that, Felicity? All of us. This is all of us. Are you hearing my point? All of us. Nod or don't nod, Felicity. Is that understandable? Speak to me. Turn off your thing. Unmute. Are you hearing the point I'm making? Or not? Unmute. Unmute, honey. You've muted again. Did you hear my words?
Now?
Can you hear my words? That's what I'm trying to say. It's a gradual process. If we begin, as we go, we lessen our delusions, we lessen our fear, we get more control, we get more confidence. So you don't just, so we gradually get less fear and more courage and more love and more wisdom. That's the process of being a Buddhist. Can you hear that?
Yeah. And I can say that it's working.
There you go, you see, so you know what I'm talking about. I'm just giving you an example because, that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. It is, and that's the point. In other words, what I'm saying here is, when you realize emptiness, which is the final job of cutting the nonsense, then there literally couldn't be no fear, even as you're drowning. But what I'm trying to say is it doesn't just happen overnight. You don't go from panic and fear to no fear. It's a gradual, incremental process as you steady your mind, as we learn to get control, as we practice, as we purify. We get more fearless. We get more courageous. We get more loving, more wise. This is the point, It's one step at a time. But the point is, as Lama said, once he said there was no fear. So that's when we would think there would be fear. And even Mr. Darwin, what did he call it? Instinct for survival. They identified this in all the creatures of the universe as something that arises, that is necessary in order to work out what to do. Flight and fear, all this business. No, Buddha calls it ego grasping. When you don't have you're not believing in an intrinsic I, even as you're drowning, his words expressed it. In other words, there was no fear. There can't be. And this is the interesting point. We assume you have to have that fear to cause you to want to survive. No, you would have seen this head come to the surface. He would have gone gasping for air. But then we assume, if there's no instinct for survival, we assume he would have sunk to the bottom of the river like a stone and gone, oh, well, I'm drowning, it doesn't matter. They're the two extremes we have. It's just not true. He would have been struggling to survive, but this is the point. There was no fear because he had no eye to grasp at. He was seeing very clearly exactly what was going on, and he did everything he could to still survive, but his mind was clear as if he's walking on a street on a sunny day. This is hard for us to imagine, but this is what Buddha says we're capable of, And this is especially when we realize emptiness, because this fear is so primordial. We can really work hard on our minds, but until we realize emptiness, we will still have that impulse of an I that's been attacked, an I that's been offended, That's how subtle it is, It's very profound, very fascinating.
And when sometimes in meditation you get this...
A glimpse.
You do get a little glimpse of that, don't you?
Exactly, Felicity. So it gives us courage, But this is when it becomes a real experience and you cannot lose it, You can't lose this one. And that's why Buddha says we've had single point of concentration in countless lifetimes, but we've never used it to realize emptiness. So we lose the plot and fall down again, So, no time to waste. So it's time to go. Look, 10 past, you people.
When we first start working on our minds, it's possible that it can feel worse.
Absolutely, darling, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we're noticing all the garbage. Absolutely, there's no question. And that should give us great encouragement instead of thinking, oh my God, I'm getting worse. This is an incredibly important point. It's as if you've never watched your body and your health. But when you start to pay attention to your health, you notice all the bits and pieces, you know what's going on, you become more intimately familiar with your body. But we're just mostly ignorant. We don't notice our mind. This is so important. And even, I tell you, one of our friends, an Australian monk called Roger, not Lama Zopa's Roger, another one, he's a meditator for like 30 years, off and on, doing big, long retreats. At some point, he told me he was out of his brain with rage and anger, like he was going crazy, and he was so distressed. And he went to Lama Zopa, and Rinpoche laughed and laughed and laughed. Fantastic, he said. The dirt has to come out. The dirt has to come out. The dirt has to come out. I cannot stress this enough. We often think we're just getting worse. I can't believe I'm getting so angry. But you're stirring all up the mess, It's like when you go to the gym. You go to the gym to get fit, but believe me, on the first day you come home with muscles you didn't even know you had. That's a good sign, not a bad sign. But we know that when it comes to the body. But we can't cope with the emotional stuff, It's so important to know, Rachel. Unbelievably important. So just getting angry doesn't mean you're getting better. But if you're working on your mind and the anger rises, see, there's two very distinct things. Let's say Paul's my boyfriend, he's a creep or something, and I'm trying to work on my mind. So, no, let's say he's just my boyfriend, and I hate him, and I come to you, and I moan and complain about this evil Paul, he did this, and he did that, and he did this. All I'm doing is getting angry and increasing my anger. But if I come to you as my friend, and I'm struggling to work with my anger, I might be crying and yelling, but it's very different because I want to work with my anger, and I'm using you as my friend to help me see my anger. That's called practice. We've got to see the difference. So we shouldn't be scared of our minds. It's a question of not buying into it, recognizing it's there because it's all old stuff, and then having the courage to hear it and not be afraid of it. We're so very afraid of our own mind, you know. It's really wrong. It's such a wrong view. Are you with me, Rachel? Okay, good, darling.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Fantastic.
It's just, I guess there's that. I still have that wrong view of permanence. So I feel like just because I'm feeling wrong for an extended period of time, I'm convinced that I will always feel that way.
No, that's another whole one. That's one that freaks us out completely. This is me, and it's for eternity. I know. When we can even know it's impermanent and work with it and have courage to see it and not live in denial of it, this is very profound practice, darling. Absolutely.
Okay.
Good. Thank you, Rachel, so much. What else, you people? Anything? Nothing? Nothing? So we can finish.